He didn't scream. He didn't even hesitate. He just opened the car door, pulled out his 5-year-old daughter, burning with fever, barely conscious, and left her in the mud, in the middle of a storm, like she was nothing. No goodbyes, no guilt, just the sound of the engine fading as he disappeared into the night. You think you've heard stories about cruelty, but this gutted me. And then, just when the world felt irredeemable, a white horse stepped out of the trees. Yes, a real horse, soaked to the bone, wild and untamed, yet gentle enough to recognize a soul on the verge of fading. What he did next, I still can't explain, but I've come to believe that sometimes the universe sends angels on 4 legs. There's something about this story that stays with you. Maybe it's the image of a child abandoned in the dark, or maybe it's the way hope arrives in the most unexpected form. Either way, I want to know what you think. What does this make you feel? If you were the one who found her, what would you have done? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice belongs in this conversation. Stay until the end. I have a little gift for you there. Now, let's return to the story and see how it all unfolds. The grand, Tudor-style Beaumont mansion stood silhouetted against a bruised sky, its Gothic spires like accusing fingers pointing at the bruised, swirling clouds, a late-afternoon humidity, thick and cloying, pressed down on the manicured but unnervingly silent grounds. The wind, a restless harbinger, whispered through the ancient oaks, carrying the metallic scent of an impending storm. Inside, the opulence felt cold, the vast rooms echoing with a loneliness that no amount of antique furniture or priceless art could fill. Victor Beaumont, a man whose tailored suits seemed molded from the same steel as his unyielding ambition, paced the confines of his dark, mahogany-paneled study. The heavy damask curtains were drawn, shutting out what little light remained of the oppressive day. His normally composed features, a mask of chiseled control, were tight with a tension that vibrated in the still air. The crystal glass of amber liquid on his massive desk remained untouched, a testament to the gravity of the moment. The only sound, apart from the increasing moan of the wind outside, was the clipped, menacing tone emanating from the phone pressed hard against his ear. "Beaumont, you assured me this was airtight." The voice crackled, a viper's hiss laced with barely veiled panic. If that package, if any of the details about its acquisition, get out. It's not just your neck on the lines. I go down, you go down, everyone goes down. Handle it, Beaumont. Whatever it takes. And I mean whatever it takes. Victor's jaw clenched, a muscle pulsing rhythmically. "I understand the stakes," he said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "It will be handled. Discretion is, as always, paramount." He ended the call, the sudden silence in the room amplifying the frantic thumping in his own chest, a betrayal his iron will refused to acknowledge. He stared at the phone, his mind racing, sifting through contingencies, calculating risks. This package, a meticulously buried secret from a recent, spectacularly profitable, and utterly illegal venture, was threatening to unearth itself, and the potential fallout, catastrophic. It meant the end of his empire, his reputation, his freedom. Just then, the heavy study door creaked open, a sliver of light piercing the gloom. 7-year-old Grace, his daughter, a miniature version of her late mother with wide, innocent eyes and a cascade of dark curls, tiptoed in. She clutched a piece of paper in her small hand, a crayon smudge on her cheek. Cooper, her shadow, a magnificent Rottweiler with a chest like a wine barrel and eyes full of an almost human understanding, padded silently beside her, his massive head level with her shoulder. "Daddy." Grace's voice was a small, hesitant chime. "Look what I drew." She beamed, holding up a child's vibrant, chaotic drawing. It's a clown. See? With a really big, funny red nose. He looks just like that man who came to see you last week. The one who kept rubbing his nose. Victor's blood ran cold. His gaze, usually softened by a carefully constructed paternal affection when directed at Grace, sharpened into something predatory. The drawing, amidst the scribbled sunshine and misshapen flowers, depicted a crude stick figure. But the clown's nose wasn't just big. It was bulbous, a distinctive, almost cartoonish feature that Victor instantly recognized. It belonged to Niccolo Moretti, a key and notoriously volatile associate in the very deal his contact had just warned him about. Moretti, whose paranoia was legendary, had indeed been at the mansion. His nervous habit of rubbing his prominent nose, a detail a child might innocently recall and reproduce. She knows too much. Victor's mind screamed, the thought a shard of ice in his heart. Or she'll piece it together. A child. A goddamn child's drawing could be the loose thread that unravels everything. The faint, almost imperceptible tremor in his hands was the only outward sign of the seismic shift within him. The love he'd professed, the life he'd built around the illusion of a doting father, crumbled, revealing the ruthless core beneath. Grace, his own daughter, had unwittingly become a liability, a fatal one. A chilling calm descended over Victor. He forced a smile, a grotesque contortion of his lips that didn't reach his eyes. It's beautiful, sweetie, he managed, his voice unnervingly even. Truly a masterpiece. Now, guess what? It's time for you to go on a little adventure. A special surprise just for you. Grace's eyes lit up, her earlier apprehension forgotten. An adventure. Where? Daddy. Can Cooper come? Victor's smile tightened. Not this time. Princess, Cooper needs to stay here and guard the house for Daddy. This adventure is just for us. A short while later, Victor summoned Marcus Thorne, a man whose loyalty was bought and paid for in thick wads of cash and the implicit threat of Victor's displeasure. Marcus was built like a disused bulldozer, his face a roadmap of bad decisions and a quiet, brutal efficiency. He stood before Victor's desk, his gaze carefully neutral, absorbing his employer's instructions. Take her deep into the woods west of the old Blackwood Pines resort. Victor commanded, his voice devoid of any emotion. He spread a map on the desk, his finger jabbing at a remote, densely forested area. The storm's moving in. Use it. Leave a few of her things. A ribbon. Maybe that ridiculous stuffed rabbit she drags everywhere. To make it look like she wandered off. Got disoriented. Make it convincing. This weather will be our alibi. No one sees you. No mistakes. Marcus. None. Marcus's eyes flickered. Perhaps a spark of something. Doubt. Revulsion. But it was extinguished as quickly as it appeared. Yes, Mr. Beaumont, he rumbled, his voice a gravelly monotone. Victor then turned to Grace, his demeanor shifting with sickening ease into that of a loving father. Grace, darling, he cooed, his voice dripping with false sweetness. Daddy has a wonderful secret to show you, hidden away in a magical part of the forest. It's a surprise? We're going right now. Just you and me. Won't that be fun? Grace, though excited by the promise of a secret, looked crestfallen. But Daddy, I want Cooper to come. Going to the forest without Cooper is no fun. He always finds the best sticks, and he keeps the scary shadows away. She reached for Cooper's thick fur, her small hand disappearing into it. Cooper, who had been watching Victor with an unsettlingly intelligent gaze, a low growl vibrating deep in his chest, began to whine as Victor gently but firmly took Grace's hand, pulling her towards the door. Cooper's anxiety erupted. He barked, a deep, booming sound that echoed through the cavernous hall, and lunged forward, trying to position himself between Grace and her father. "Quiet. You damn mutt," Victor snapped, his facade cracking for a terrifying instant. Marcus, anticipating the command, moved with surprising speed. He grabbed Cooper's collar, the dog struggling, his powerful muscles straining against the man's grip. A heavy chain was produced, and with a sickening clank, Cooper was dragged, still barking and writhing, towards a small utility room under the grand staircase. Grace cried out, "No, Daddy, don't hurt Cooper. Let him come." Her small face was a mask of distress, her eyes wide with fear as she saw her beloved protector chained, his desperate barks muffled as the heavy door slammed shut. She looked up at her father, a dawning confusion in her eyes, a question he refused to answer. Victor merely tightened his grip on her hand, his smile now a fixed, chilling rictus. "He'll be fine. Sweetie, now, let's go on our adventure before the rain gets too bad." The forest was a labyrinth of skeletal trees and grasping shadows, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and decaying leaves. The promised storm had broken with a vengeance, rain lashing down in near horizontal sheets, driven by a wind that shrieked through the canopy like a banshee. Marcus, grim-faced and silent, dragged a terrified Grace deeper into the woods, far from any discernible path. The magical surprise had long since dissolved into a nightmarish reality. He stopped abruptly near the crumbling foundation of what might have once been a small outbuilding of the abandoned Blackwood Pines Resort, a place notorious for its unsettling atmosphere even in broad daylight. A jagged, moss-covered outcrop of rock formed a shallow overhang, offering little real shelter. "Stay put," Marcus grunted, his voice devoid of any inflection. He avoided her gaze, his own eyes scanning the darkening woods. "Someone will come for you." It was a lie, delivered with the chilling indifference of a man simply completing a distasteful task. Then, he turned and melted back into the storm-lashed trees, his dark clothes making him disappear almost instantly. Grace sank to the wet ground, a small, whimpering bundle of terror. "Daddy," she screamed, her voice swallowed by the roar of the wind and rain. "Marcus, don't leave me alone. Please, Cooper, save me." Her tiny body shook uncontrollably, not just from the biting cold that seeped into her bones, but from a primal fear that clawed at her throat. Her father, the man she loved, the man who was supposed to protect her, had done this. The betrayal was a wound far deeper than any physical discomfort. She was alone, lost in a maelstrom of nature's fury and human cruelty. Her small heart, already prone to erratic rhythms when she was overly agitated, hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Back at the mansion, in the cramped, dark utility room, Cooper had not been idle. The sound of Grace's initial distress, even muffled, had sent him into a controlled frenzy. He'd tested the chain, the door, his intelligent mind working with a singular, desperate focus. Grace was in danger. He could smell her fear, a scent more potent than the storm. The chain, old and slightly rusted at one link, was strong, but Cooper's determination, fueled by an unwavering loyalty, was stronger. He twisted, pulled, gnawed, his powerful jaws working relentlessly. Finally, with a sharp snap, the weakened link gave way. He slammed his massive body against the door. Once, twice, the wood groaning in protest. On the third impact, the latch splintered, and the door flew open. He was a blur of black fur and focused intent, ignoring the stinging rain as he burst from the house. His incredible sense of smell, a gift of his breed, locked onto the faint, fading scent of Grace and Marcus. Even amidst the olfactory chaos of the storm, he tracked them, his paws barely seeming to touch the treacherous, rain-slicked ground, his progress a miracle of instinct and devotion. The forest was a cacophony of terrifying sounds, but through it all, Cooper heard the faint, desperate cries of his girl. He burst into the small, dismal clearing just as Grace's sobs were escalating into gasping, panicked breaths. She was huddled against the cold rock, her face pale, her lips tinged with blue. "Cooper," she shrieked, a surge of desperate hope in her voice as she saw him, a dark avenger materializing from the tempest. He reached her in 3 bounds, whining low in his throat, nudging her face with his wet muzzle, licking away the tears that mingled with the raindrops on her cheeks. He pressed his warm, solid body against hers, a shield against the cold and the terror. Suddenly, a section of the decaying roof from the nearby ruin, loosened by the relentless wind and rain, groaned ominously. A large, rotten beam creaked, then began to tilt precariously, directly above where Grace sat. Cooper, with a lightning-fast reaction that belied his bulk, barked a single, sharp command. He didn't wait for her to understand. He seized the back of her soaked jacket in his powerful jaws and pulled hard, yanking her away from the immediate danger just as the beam crashed down with a sickening thud, sending splinters and debris flying. It landed precisely where she had been moments before. Grace, shaken but unharmed, clung to him. Cooper, after a quick check to ensure she was safe, nuzzled her again, then let out a series of short, urgent barks, nudging her insistently with his head, not back towards the path Marcus had taken, but in a different direction, deeper into the forest, but away from the immediate, crumbling danger and, instinctively, away from the direction of the mansion. He seemed to sense that safety did not lie behind them, his eyes, gleaming with intelligence and a fierce protectiveness. "Met Herse," he licked her hand, a silent vow of loyalty. Then, taking a firm but gentle grip on her sleeve, Cooper began to lead his small, terrified charge into the howling unknown. The storm raged around them, the darkness of the forest absolute, but for Grace, the unwavering presence of her canine guardian was a single, flickering beacon of hope in an overwhelming sea of despair. Their journey had just begun. The relentless storm that had swallowed the forest eventually wept itself into a bruised, weeping dawn, days blurred into a desperate cycle of hunger, fear, and an exhausting flight through the unforgiving wilderness. Grace, small and fragile, clung to Cooper, her silent, steadfast protector. He had led her with an uncanny sense of direction, finding meager shelter beneath dense thickets and once, in the hollow of a fallen giant, he'd even managed to catch a rabbit, sharing the meager sustenance. But Grace was fading. Fever burned in her eyes, and her already compromised heart struggled with the prolonged stress and privation. Cooper, his own massive frame leaner, his fur matted with mud and burrs, never flagged, his determination a burning ember in the face of despair. He knew, with an instinct that transcended animal understanding, that they needed help, and soon, finally, on what Grace vaguely registered as perhaps the 3rd or 4th day. He nudged her towards the thinning edge of the trees, where a sliver of open meadow promised something other than suffocating woods. It was there, amidst the dew-kissed ferns at the forest's hem, that Sarah Evans found them. Sarah, a woman whose face was etched with the kindness of a life lived close to the earth, was out checking her husband David's snares, a wicker basket on her arm for any late-season berries or mushrooms. She spotted a flash of black fur first, then the small, still form huddled beside it in a shallow depression beneath an ancient, gnarled oak. "Oh, my heavens," Sarah breathed, her hand flying to her mouth, her heart clenched. A child, out here. Cooper, despite his exhaustion, was on his feet in an instant, a low, guttural growl rumbling in his chest. He positioned himself protectively before Grace, his body a weary but formidable shield, his lips curled back, revealing teeth that could tear flesh, but his amber eyes held a desperate, pleading weariness that belied the threat. Sarah stopped, her movement slow and deliberate. "Easy there, big fellow," she said, her voice soft, imbued with a gentle authority that had soothed countless frightened animals on their small farm. "I'm not going to hurt you. Or her." She could see the child now. A girl, no older than 7 or 8, pale and still, her clothes torn and filthy. "Oh, you poor things." She carefully placed her basket down and retrieved a canteen of water and a wrapped piece of apple cake she'd packed. She uncapped the canteen, pouring a little water into her cupped hand and extending it slowly. "Thirsty. You must be," Grace moaned, a tiny, feverish sound, and shifted slightly. Cooper's growl softened to a whine. His gaze flickered between Sarah and the child, a conflict raging within him. But Grace's faint sound seemed to tip the scales. He looked at Sarah, a long, searching look, and then, with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the world, he took a tentative step back, his body slumping slightly. "That's a good boy," Sarah murmured, relief washing over her. She approached cautiously, her heart aching at the sight of the little girl's flushed cheeks and labored breathing. "David," she called out, her voice carrying across the meadow. "David, come quick, and bring the truck." David Evans, a man as sturdy and dependable as the ancient oaks surrounding their property, arrived minutes later, his initial shock quickly giving way to a quiet, focused concern. "She's burning up," he said, gently feeling Grace's forehead. "And this dog, he won't leave her side. Will he?" He looked at Cooper, whose head now rested on Grace's small shoulder, his eyes fixed on the girl. "He's a Rottweiler, Sarah. Looks like he's been through hell and back to protect her." David carefully scooped Grace into his strong arms. "We need to get them home right away. It'll be dark soon, and another chill is setting in." Cooper, after a moment's hesitation and a reassuring look from Sarah, followed them, a silent, devoted shadow. The Evanses' farmhouse, nestled in a gentle fold of hills, was a haven of warmth and the comforting aroma of baking bread and wood smoke. It was a small, unpretentious place, but every corner radiated a lived-in coziness that was the antithesis of Victor Beaumont's sterile mansion. Sarah, with a practiced tenderness honed from raising 2 sons now grown, set about caring for Grace. She gently bathed the grime and mud from the child's frail body, her touch soothing. Grace remained mostly unresponsive, her eyes fluttering open occasionally, filled with a deep, haunting fear. David brought fresh, warm goat's milk and a soft broth, which Sarah patiently coaxed Grace to sip. Cooper, after devouring a large bowl of stew David set down for him, lay by the hearth, his gaze never straying far from the small bedroom where Grace now rested in a clean, soft bed. Over the next few days, as Grace's fever slowly receded under Sarah's diligent care, a troubling observation began to dawn on them. Grace was unnervingly quiet. She rarely spoke, and when she did, it was in a voice barely above a whisper, mostly directed at Cooper, who seemed to understand her every nuance. "Have you noticed, David?" Sarah said one evening, her brow furrowed as she mended a tear in one of Grace's salvaged garments. They sat at their kitchen table, the only light from the flickering oil lamp casting long shadows. "She doesn't seem to hear very well. I called to her this afternoon from the doorway, not loudly, mind you, but she didn't even flinch. It was only when I stepped into her line of sight that she looked up." David nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "I've seen it too. She watches our mouths intently when we speak, and sudden noises. Like when I dropped that pan yesterday. She startled, but it seemed more from the vibration or seeing our reaction than the sound itself." He sighed. running a calloused hand through his hair. Poor little mite. As if being lost in the woods wasn't enough. Grace, when she felt strong enough to leave the bed, would often sit by the window, Cooper's head resting in her lap, her gaze fixed on the distant, brooding line of the forest. Sometimes, Sarah would find her drawing with a piece of charcoal on scraps of paper David provided. Not clowns or sunshine, but intricate, dark patterns of tangled trees, or a recurring image of a falling beam. Her silence was a heavy blanket, her eyes reflecting a knowledge no child should possess. Once, alone with Cooper, she whispered, her voice raspy. "Cooper, it's warm here. They're nice, but I'm still scared. Cooper, so scared." Cooper whimpered softly, licking her hand. Meanwhile, miles away, in the polished, media-saturated world of Victor Beaumont, a very different drama was unfolding. Victor, his face a mask of carefully crafted anguish, launched a massive, public campaign to find his beloved missing daughter. His image, haggard and tear-streaked, filled television screens across the state. Grace, my darling Grace Beaumont, 7 years old. His voice would choke. Live from a meticulously staged press conference in front of his imposing mansion. Vanished during a family camping trip in the North Blackwood Forest. A tragic accident. A moment's distraction. He offered a staggering reward for any information leading to her safe return. "I will never give up hope," he'd declare, his voice thick with emotion that fooled millions. "Please, everyone, I beg you, help me bring my little girl home. I'm willing to give up everything to have her back." Alone, in the privacy of his study, the mask would drop. Everything's going according to plan. He'd think, a sliver of a cold smile playing on his lips as he swirled the expensive brandy in his glass. The public is eating it up. She's likely perished out there, as intended. And if, by some remote chance, she's found, this performance will ensure no one questions my grief, my innocence. I'll be the grieving father, reunited with his traumatized child. End of story. His camping trip was a fabrication. The North Blackwood Forest, miles from where he'd instructed Marcus to abandon Grace. A calculated misdirection. The news of the missing Beaumont girl eventually reached the quiet hollow where the Evanses lived. David brought home a week-old newspaper from his trip to the general store in the nearby town of Harmony Creek. Sarah gasped when she saw the picture of Victor Beaumont, his arm around a smiling, younger Grace. The same Grace now sleeping fitfully in their spare room. A few days later, Mrs. Agnes Periwinkle, the proprietor of Harmony Creek's general store-cum-unofficial town hub, a woman whose sharp eyes missed little and whose network of information was more reliable than the county sheriff's, paid the Evanses a visit. She was a woman of indeterminate age, with a bird-like alertness and a kind heart beneath a sometimes brusque exterior. She'd heard whispers about the child the Evanses had taken in. Over cups of chamomile tea, Sarah and David hesitantly shared what little they knew, showing Agnes the newspaper clipping. Mrs. Agnes peered at Victor Beaumont's face, her lips pursed. "Beaumont, eh?" she said, tapping the picture with a gnarled finger. "Says here she went missing in North Blackwood Forest. Now, that's a good 20 miles north of Aspen Creek Woods, where you found little... What are you calling her?" "We've just been calling her Honey, or Sweetie," Sarah admitted. "She hasn't told us her name. But yes, it was the edge of Aspen Creek, near the old abandoned Blackwood Pines Resort." Mrs. Agnes's eyes narrowed. "Blackwood Pines, you say. Interesting. Very interesting." She leaned forward, her voice dropping conspiratorially. "That Victor Beaumont. He's a big city man, a developer. Been sniffing around that old resort property for months. Rumor has it, there are some complications with the land titles. Some shady dealings. Nothing proven. Of course. Just talk. She took a slow sip of her tea. And a child goes missing on a supposed camping trip in one forest, only to be found near a controversial piece of land her father is interested in. Miles away, looking like she's been through a war. Doesn't quite add up. Does it? Her words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Sarah looked at David. Her own unspoken fears and doubts mirrored in his eyes. The child in their care wasn't just lost. She was a piece of a puzzle far more sinister than they could have imagined. Agnes, Sarah said, her voice trembling slightly. What he said on the television. About the camping trip. It felt rehearsed. And Grace, she's terrified of him. I saw her face when David brought in that newspaper with his picture. Pure terror. Mrs. Agnes nodded slowly. Children see things. Deer. And that dog of hers. Animals sense evil. Later that night, long after Mrs. Agnes had departed, leaving a trail of unease behind her, Sarah and David sat in silence, the weight of their discovery pressing down on them. Agnes has a point, David, Sarah finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. Though Grace was asleep and out of earshot, I can't shake this awful feeling. That man, his eyes, they're like chips of ice. And little Grace, she's not just lost. Is she? Someone did this to her. We can't just give her back to him, if he even is truly looking for her in the right way. David, who had been staring into the dying embers of the fire, clenched his fists. He was a simple man, a farmer, but his moral compass was unwavering. No, he said, his voice firm with a newfound resolve. No, we can't. That child has been through an unimaginable hell. She's found a safe place here, with us, with that loyal dog of hers. We don't know the whole truth, but what we do know, it stinks to high heaven. He looked at Sarah, his gaze steady. All right, we'll try to find out more, carefully, for Grace. She deserves to know the truth. And more importantly, she deserves to be safe, truly safe. The decision settled between them, a silent pact under the low farmhouse roof. They were treading into dangerous waters, but for the small, silent girl who had unknowingly sought refuge with them, and for the magnificent dog who was her unwavering guardian, they would face whatever came their way. The fragile haven they offered was about to become a front line in a battle for a child's life. Sarah, with Mrs. Agnes's discreet help, began researching specialists. The name Evelyn Reed surfaced repeatedly, a child psychologist renowned for her work with severely traumatized children, particularly those with communication challenges. She was based in a city a few hours away, but her reputation for patience, innovative methods, and fierce advocacy for her young clients made her their best hope. After an emotional phone call where Sarah haltingly explained their situation, Ms. Reed, intrigued and concerned by the fragmented details, agreed to come. Evelyn Reed arrived on a crisp autumn morning, the kind where the air is sharp and the sunlight feels like a fragile blessing. She was a woman in her late 30s, with kind, intelligent eyes that seemed to see more than most, and a calm, reassuring presence. She wasn't what Sarah had entirely pictured. There was a core of steel beneath her gentle demeanor. We're putting all our faith in you, Mrs. Reed, Sarah said, her voice thick with unshed tears as she led Evelyn into the cozy living room where a fire crackled merrily, a stark contrast to the turmoil in their hearts. Please, help Grace find her voice. Help us understand. Grace, initially, was a shadow. She hid behind Sarah's legs, her small hand clutching Cooper's thick fur as if it were a lifeline. Cooper, ever watchful, positioned himself between Grace and the newcomer, not aggressively, but as a clear, silent guardian. Evelyn didn't press. She simply sat on the floor, a small distance away, and began to idly sketch on a pad she'd brought. Her movements unhurried. She hummed a soft, tuneless melody. Hours passed in these quiet, patient overtures. Evelyn brought out simple wooden toys, colorful blocks, and soft clay. She never directly addressed Grace at first, but spoke softly to Cooper, praising his calm demeanor, admiring his glossy coat. Slowly, tentatively, Grace's curiosity began to outweigh her fear. It was Cooper who bridged the gap, nudging a small wooden bird towards Evelyn with his nose. Then, looking back at Grace, after the first few sessions, Evelyn spoke with the Evanses. "Grace is a very special girl," she affirmed, her gaze serious. "The hearing impairment is significant, though not total. It seems she can perceive some lower frequency sounds and vibrations, which is why she startles at sudden, heavy noises, but primarily, she's relying on lip reading and visual cues. Her trauma, however, is profound. She has a complex inner world and is carrying an immense burden. We need to be incredibly patient, but she's also a fighter. And that magnificent dog of hers," she smiled faintly at Cooper, who was dozing by Grace's small feet, "is more than a pet. He's her anchor, her interpreter of a world that has become terrifying." Evelyn introduced simple sign language, basic gestures for yes, no, safe, scared, help. Grace picked them up with surprising speed, her intelligent eyes absorbing every movement. But her primary mode of communication, the conduit for the horrors she held within, was her drawings. During one session, Grace sat hunched over a large sheet of paper, charcoal clutched tightly in her small fist. Cooper lay beside her, his chin resting on her knee. For nearly an hour, she drew with a fierce, desperate intensity. The result was a chilling tableau, a stick figure of a man with cold, empty eyes, unmistakably Victor, standing tall and menacing. Beside him, a smaller, cowering figure was being dragged towards a dark, swirling vortex of trees by another man, whose face was contorted in a snarl. Grace pointed to the tall figure, then made the sign for "Daddy." Her lower lip trembled. Then, her small voice, raspy from disuse and fear, whispered, "Bad. Daddy." No smile. Talked to scary men. Men with snakes on skin. She shuddered, her gaze darting to the window as if expecting shadows to leap out. She then tapped the drawing of her father, and then herself, and made a pushing away motion, followed by the sign for "Gone." Heard Daddy say. She struggled, her breathing shallow. "Girl, trouble, must go." Way. Her eyes filled with tears, and she buried her face in Cooper's fur, her small shoulders shaking. Evelyn gently stroked her back. "It's okay, Grace. You're safe here. You're so brave to tell me." Piece by painstaking piece, through fragmented sentences, vivid, disturbing drawings, and the simple signs Evelyn taught her, Grace told her story. She depicted the growing coldness in her father, the hushed, angry phone calls, the unfamiliar, frightening men who sometimes came to the house. She drew the car ride with Marcus, his rough hands, the terrifying isolation of the forest, the biting wind, the feeling of being utterly alone, a tiny speck in a vast, hostile world. She drew Cooper, a beacon of light and warmth, finding her, protecting her from a falling beam, leading her through the relentless storm. Evelyn meticulously documented everything, her initial professional concern deepening into a cold anger. What Grace describes isn't just neglect or abandonment. "Sarah, David," she said one evening, her voice tight with controlled fury. This was a calculated, deliberate attempt to make a child disappear. Victor Beaumont is likely hiding a crime of immense magnitude, and Grace was either a direct witness or holds a key piece of evidence he desperately needed to bury. She is, in essence, a living testament to his guilt. Meanwhile, Marcus Thorne was a man teetering on the edge of a precipice. The money Victor had paid him for his service felt like burning coals in his pocket. He hadn't signed up to be a party to a child's potential murder. He'd thought it was just misplacing her, making her a problem for someone else. But the news of Grace Beaumont's tragic disappearance, the sight of Victor's crocodile tears on television, and the persistent, gnawing image of that terrified little girl's face in the storm-lashed forest gave him no peace. He started drinking heavily, his nights filled with a paranoia that Victor's reach was long, that loose ends like him were routinely tidied up, driven by a cocktail of fear and a desperate desire for more money to disappear himself. Marcus made a reckless call. Beaumont. He slurred into the phone, trying to inject a bravado he didn't feel. It's Marcus. About the girl. I know a lot. More than you paid for. I think my silence is worth a bit more, considering the voice that came back was not the publicly grieving father, but the ice-cold predator Grace had described. Marcus, Victor Beaumont's voice was a silken threat. You insignificant maggot. You think you can blackmail me? You were a tool, a disposable one. If you so much as breathe a word of this to anyone, I'll ensure you vanish so completely your own mother wouldn't find a trace. Do you understand me? You pathetic excuse for a man. The line went dead. The threat, stark and unequivocal, terrified Marcus. Victor wasn't bluffing. He was trapped. Then, scanning online news articles about Grace's disappearance, desperately looking for any sign of her being found dead or alive. He wasn't sure which would be worse for him. He stumbled upon a small community forum post from Harmony Creek, vaguely mentioning a child psychologist, Evelyn Reed, who was reportedly helping a found child in the area. A desperate, slim hope flickered. Maybe, just maybe, if he came clean, he could trade what he knew for some kind of protection. He found a public number for Evelyn Reed's city practice. His call was initially intercepted by a secretary, but his desperate insistence that he had life or death information regarding Grace Beaumont eventually got him through to Evelyn herself. Miss Reed. Marcus's voice was a hoarse whisper. My name is Marcus Thorne. I'm the one who took Grace into the woods. Beaumont made me do it. He's going to kill me. I have proof. Miss Reed. Proof of what he ordered. Please. You have to help me. I don't want to die. Evelyn, though shocked by the call, maintained her composure. She arranged a clandestine meeting in a secluded diner miles from Harmony Creek. Marcus, looking like a hunted animal, his eyes darting nervously, handed over a small, cheap burner phone. He called me on this, he stammered. The order, it's recorded. He was stupid enough to be explicit. I kept it, just in case. He also provided a detailed, signed statement of Victor's instructions and his own actions, his hand shaking so violently his signature was barely legible. Armed with Grace's harrowing testimony and Marcus's damning evidence, Evelyn knew they had to act fast. But Victor Beaumont, it seemed, was already a step ahead. It was a gray, windswept late afternoon when the sleek black sedan, ostentatiously out of place on the muddy track leading to the Evanses' farmhouse, pulled up. Cooper, who had been dozing on the porch, shot to his feet, a thunderous barrage of barks erupting from his chest, every hackle raised. Victor Beaumont emerged, impeccably dressed, his face a mask of grim determination. Beside him stood a sharp-suited lawyer with a briefcase, and, to Sarah's horror, a nervous-looking woman who identified herself as a county social worker. Mr. and Mrs. Evans, the lawyer, Mr. Sterling, announced, his voice dripping with condescension as David appeared in the doorway. Sarah and Evelyn closed behind him. "We are here on behalf of Mr. Victor Beaumont, the legal guardian of Grace Beaumont. We have all the necessary court orders and documentation. We demand you release Grace into her father's custody immediately. You are, as you must be aware, illegally detaining a minor." He brandished a sheaf of papers. David Evans, his face set like granite, stood his ground, blocking the doorway. "Grace isn't going anywhere with him until we are absolutely certain she will be safe. And right now, we're far from certain. You can't just barge in here waving papers." David is right. Evelyn Reed stepped forward, her voice calm but firm, a counterpoint to Sterling's arrogance. "We have substantial reason to believe that Grace's well-being is severely compromised in Mr. Beaumont's care. In fact, we have evidence suggesting he is directly responsible for endangering her life." Victor, who had been watching Grace cowering behind Sarah, her small face pale with terror, finally spoke. He attempted a look of paternal concern, a sickeningly false veneer. "Grace, darling," he said, his voice oozing feigned tenderness. "Come to Daddy. These people, they're confusing you. They aren't good for you. Precious." Grace, who had been trembling uncontrollably, suddenly stiffened. Her fear was still palpable, but something else sparked in her eyes. A flicker of the fight Evelyn had seen. She clutched Sarah's hand tightly. Then, looking directly at Victor, she shook her head violently. Her voice, when it came, was surprisingly strong, laced with a child's pure, undiluted fury. "No, you not? Daddy, you bad man, bad." She then made the sign for "go away," her small hand chopping the air with vehemence. Cooper's barks intensified, his body tensed, ready to spring. Victor's facade momentarily cracked, his eyes flashing with a cold rage that Sterling quickly tried to smooth over. Clearly, the child is distressed and has been unduly influenced. The lawyer interjected smoothly. "We will have to insist. You will insist on nothing." David Evans boomed, his patience gone. "You're not taking her. Not today. You want to fight this. Fine. We'll see you in court. With our own lawyer. Now, I suggest you leave my property." The standoff was electric. The social worker looked increasingly uncomfortable. Victor stared at Grace, his expression unreadable, but radiating a chilling possessiveness. Finally, with a curt nod from Beaumont, Sterling reluctantly stepped back. "This is not over. Mr. Evans," he hissed, "you will regret obstructing justice." Victor cast one last, lingering look at Grace, a look that promised retribution, before turning and striding back to his car, as the sedan retreated down the track, leaving a cloud of dust and an unnerving silence. Evelyn, Sarah, and David exchanged grim glances. They had won this skirmish, but the war to protect Grace had just been officially declared, and Victor Beaumont had shown he would use every weapon at his disposal. The safety of their fragile haven felt more precarious than ever. What did you think of today's story? If it made your day, drop a good in the comments. If it didn't hit the mark, just type 1. Got your own thoughts? I'd love to hear them below. And hey, don't forget to hit subscribe. It's free, and it really helps the channel grow. Thank you so much for being here. The sleek black sedan's departure from the Evanses' farm left an unnerving quiet in its wake. The metallic scent of its exhaust fumes a jarring intrusion on the crisp country air. The confrontation had been a victory, but a fragile one. Victor Beaumont was a wounded predator, and they all knew he would not simply slink away. Evelyn Reed, ever pragmatic, immediately began strategizing their next moves, which included finding a tenacious lawyer unfazed by Beaumont's wealth and influence. The evidence from Marcus Thorne was potent, but a direct confrontation with Victor's legal team was inevitable. and they needed to be prepared. News, however, has a way of seeping through even the most carefully constructed walls. Whether it was Victor's own lawyer discreetly informing the family matriarch, or perhaps Marcus, in his desperation, trying another avenue, word of Grace's survival and the burgeoning scandal reached Eleanor Beaumont. Eleanor Beaumont, Victor's mother and Grace's grandmother, was a woman forged in the crucible of old money and societal expectation. She resided in a stately mansion in the city, a bastion of curated elegance and unspoken power. Her arrival at Evelyn Reed's modest city office a week later was unannounced, her presence heralded by a chauffeur who looked more like a bodyguard. She was impeccably dressed in Chanel, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, her features patrician, though etched with a weariness that her expensive pearls couldn't quite conceal. "Ms. Reed, I presume." Eleanor's voice was cultured, cool, with an undercurrent of authority that brooked no argument. She did not wait for an invitation to sit. "I am Eleanor Beaumont. My son, Victor, has informed me of certain unfortunate accusations regarding my granddaughter, Grace. I am here to understand the full scope of this situation." Her eyes, a pale, piercing blue, swept around Evelyn's functional office, perhaps contrasting it with the opulence she was accustomed to. "This entire matter needs to be handled with utmost discretion, for everyone's benefit, most particularly the child's and, of course, the family's reputation." Evelyn met her gaze evenly, refusing to be intimidated. "Mrs. Beaumont, I appreciate your directness. My primary concern, and that of the Evans family, who have so lovingly cared for Grace, is Grace's safety, her well-being, and her right to happiness. The truth of what happened to her needs to be brought fully into the light, regardless of who might be discomforted or damaged by it." The initial meeting was tense, a polite but firm battle of wills. Eleanor listened, her expression unreadable, as Evelyn carefully outlined what they knew, hinting at the evidence without revealing its full extent. Eleanor spoke of Victor's distress, the misunderstandings that could arise, the possibility that Grace was confused by her ordeal. "My son is a powerful man, Mrs. Reed," Eleanor stated, a subtle warning in her tone. "He is not accustomed to being challenged. Perhaps a more amicable resolution could be found. An amicable resolution that silences a child who was left for dead in a forest." "Mrs. Beaumont," Evelyn countered, her voice quiet but sharp. "I don't believe that's an option." Eleanor's composure flickered. She requested to see the evidence. More importantly, she requested to see Grace. Evelyn, after consulting with the Evanses and their newly hired lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Helen McDowell, agreed, but under strict conditions. The meeting took place at the Evanses' farmhouse. Grace, holding tightly to Sarah's hand on one side and Cooper's leash on the other, was understandably apprehensive. Eleanor Beaumont, confronted with the tangible reality of her granddaughter, small, clearly traumatized, with a hearing impairment that made communication a careful, deliberate process, seemed, for the first time, truly shaken. The opulence of her city life felt a world away from this rustic haven and the raw, painful truth it held. Evelyn presented Grace's drawings, the chilling narratives of fear and abandonment. She played a short, carefully edited video clip from one of Grace's therapy sessions, where Grace, using simple signs and halting words, described the scary man her father had sent her with and the crushing loneliness of the storm. Marcus Thorne, now under discreet police protection arranged by Helen McDowell, provided a sworn, videotaped deposition, his face pale, his voice trembling as he recounted Victor's cold instructions, corroborating Grace's story and the damning recording from the burner phone. Eleanor Beaumont watched and listened, her regal facade slowly crumbling. The initial disbelief, the maternal instinct to defend her son, warred with the undeniable horror unfolding before her. She saw Grace, her own flesh and blood, flinch when a log shifted in the fireplace, her eyes darting with a fear no child should know. She saw the unwavering loyalty in Cooper's gaze as he nudged Grace's hand reassuringly. She saw the quiet dignity of the Evanses, simple people who had opened their home and hearts to a child abandoned by her own. Later that evening, alone in the guest room Sarah had prepared for her, Eleanor sat by the window, staring out at the moonlit fields. In her hands, she clutched a small, worn silver locket, a gift from Victor when he was a boy, a smiling, innocent child himself. Where had that boy gone? When had the ambition she'd so admired curdled into such monstrous cruelty? "It can't be," she whispered to the silent room, the words a painful echo of her thoughts. Victor, my son, the boy I adored. Could he truly be capable of such calculated evil? Oh, God, where did I go wrong? Did I see the signs and choose to ignore them? The next morning, Eleanor Beaumont was a changed woman. The icy composure was still there, but it was now underpinned by a steely resolve. She found Evelyn in the kitchen, quietly discussing plans with Sarah. "Ms. Reed," Eleanor said, her voice low but firm. "I understand now. I have been willfully blind for too long. My son has committed a monstrous act. He must answer for it." Her eyes, though shadowed with pain, held a new clarity. "Tell me what I need to do. Tell me how I can help Grace and ensure that the full truth comes out." And so, Eleanor Beaumont, the formidable matriarch, became their most unexpected and powerful ally. She knew Victor's secrets, his vulnerabilities, the hidden compartments of his life. She explained that Victor's desperation stemmed from Grace accidentally seeing documents related to a vast network of offshore accounts and shell corporations he was using to launder money for a dangerous international syndicate. The very package his associate had warned him about, Grace's innocent drawing of Moretti, had been the terrifying confirmation that his carefully constructed world was on the verge of collapse. "He keeps meticulous records, Ms. Reed," Eleanor explained, her voice laced with a bitter understanding of her son's obsessive nature, not just of his legitimate businesses, but of everything. "He believes himself untouchable, his secrets impenetrable." She knew where he kept his most sensitive files, in a hidden safe behind a false panel in his private study at the mansion. "I still have a key to the house. He wouldn't expect me to—" Her voice trailed off, the implication clear. Under the cover of a carefully orchestrated diversion, a supposed emergency board meeting Victor had to attend out of state, Eleanor, accompanied by Helen McDowell and a private investigator, re-entered her son's cold, opulent mansion. The tension was palpable as Eleanor, her hand surprisingly steady, manipulated the hidden mechanism of the safe. Inside, nestled amongst legitimate financial statements, were ledgers and encrypted hard drives that detailed Victor's criminal enterprise, including correspondence that directly implicated him in ordering Marcus to ensure Grace disappeared permanently. It was the final, irrefutable nail in Victor Beaumont's coffin. The formal confrontation took place not in a courtroom, but in a sterile, anonymous conference room at the district attorney's office a week later. Victor Beaumont, flanked by his high-powered attorney, Mr. Sterling, initially exuded an air of indignant outrage. He was the grieving father, falsely accused, his character assassinated by a cabal of opportunists and a senile mother. "This is an outrage," Sterling boomed. "My client is the victim here. His daughter was tragically lost. And now these people are attempting to extort him, to defame him." Then, Helen McDowell, calm and methodical, began to lay out the evidence Grace's testimony. Marcus Thorne's confession and the damning recording, and finally, the meticulously documented financial crimes and the explicit order regarding Grace, all courtesy of Eleanor Beaumont. Victor's composure began to fray. He blustered. He denied. He accused. "Mother, how could you?" He spat, his voice venomous. "They've turned you against me. They just want our money." The Beaumont legacy. Eleanor Beaumont rose, her small frame radiating an unexpected strength. She looked directly at her son, her eyes filled not with hatred, but with a profound, sorrowful disappointment. "Enough, Victor," she said, her voice clear and unwavering, cutting through his tirade. "There are no more lies to hide behind. I saw the ledgers with my own eyes. I heard your voice on that recording, cold and cruel, consigning your own child to what?" Her voice broke for a moment, then firmed. "This is your signature on these transfers. These are your instructions. What did you do to Grace? Victor, what did you do to the love a father should have? What did you do to your own soul?" Grace was present, sitting quietly between Sarah Evans and Evelyn Reed, Cooper lying faithfully at her feet, his presence a warm, reassuring weight. At one point, the lead investigator, a stern-faced woman named Detective Harding, turned to her gently. "Grace, honey, can you tell us, in your own way, if that man," she gestured towards Victor, "is the man who hurt you?" Grace looked at Victor, not with the raw terror of before, but with a child's clear, unwavering gaze that saw him for what he was. She nodded slowly. Then, using the signs Evelyn had taught her, supplemented by a few soft, clear words that Evelyn translated, she said, "He, not love me. He, leave me, in dark woods, rain, cold. Very scared." She then looked at her grandmother, and a small, hesitant smile touched her lips. "Nana, here, safe." It was that simple, devastating statement, combined with the mountain of irrefutable evidence his own mother had provided, that finally broke Victor Beaumont. The arrogance, the defiance, drained out of him, leaving behind a hollow, defeated man. His shoulders slumped. I had to protect my business," he mumbled. The words a pathetic, desperate attempt at justification. "My reputation, everything I built." She saw. She could have ruined everything. "I had no choice." Detective Harding's voice was devoid of sympathy. "Mr. Beaumont, with the evidence presented, including conspiracy to commit murder, kidnapping, child endangerment, and extensive financial crimes, you are under arrest." The downfall was swift, total. Victor Beaumont, the titan of industry, the pillar of society, was led away in handcuffs, his empire crumbling around him. The legal battles would be long, but the outcome was certain. In the aftermath, as the media frenzy erupted and then eventually subsided, a new, quieter reality began to take shape for Grace. The Evanses, with Eleanor Beaumont's full support and considerable resources, were granted legal guardianship. Cooper remained her constant, furry shadow, his presence a soothing balm on the still tender scars of her trauma. Months later, standing in the Evanses' sun-drenched meadow, Grace, now a little taller, her laughter more frequent, watched Cooper chase butterflies. Eleanor sat beside Sarah on a wooden bench, a comfortable silence between them. Grace still had nightmares sometimes, and her hearing would always be a challenge. But the terror that had once consumed her was receding, replaced by a growing sense of security and love. She was learning to trust again, to find joy in small things. She looked back at her grandmother and Sarah, her smile radiant. She knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her healing heart, that she was finally, truly home. The storm had passed. The sharp clang of prison gates receding behind him was a sound Victor Beaumont had replayed in his mind for years. The world outside felt alien, muted, stripped of the sharp edges of power and influence that had once defined his existence. His sentence, considerably shortened due to his eventual cooperation on other financial crime networks, a desperate bid for some semblance of leniency, brokered by a weary Eleanor, had been served. He emerged not as a titan, but as a ghost of his former self, gaunt, his once immaculate suits replaced by ill-fitting, borrowed clothes, his eyes holding the hollowed-out look of a man who had stared into an abyss and seen his own reflection. Years had indeed passed since the day his empire imploded. Years that Grace had spent blossoming under the steadfast, unconditional love of the Evans family and the quiet, unwavering support of her grandmother, Eleanor. The Evanses' farm, once a temporary refuge, had become her true home, a sanctuary of warmth, laughter, and the comforting rhythm of a life lived close to the earth. Grace, now a young woman on the cusp of her late teens, was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. The haunted, silent child had transformed. Her hearing impairment remained, a permanent reminder of a past she no longer allowed to define her. But she navigated the world with a quiet confidence, her lip-reading skills impeccable, her use of sign language fluid and expressive, her laughter, once a rare and precious sound, now rang out freely in the Evanses' sun-dappled yard as she helped Sarah tend the vibrant flower beds or worked alongside David mending fences, her hands capable, her spirit bright. Cooper, her magnificent Rottweiler, was graying around his noble muzzle, his powerful frame a little slower, but his devotion to Grace was a constant, unwavering as the North Star. He was her shadow, her confidant, the furry, four-legged embodiment of unconditional love. Mama Sarah, Grace signed one sunny afternoon, her smile radiant as she held up a perfectly ripe tomato from the vine. Her spoken words, though still carrying a unique cadence, clear and joyful. Look at this beauty. We'll have the best tomato soup tonight. At school, she excelled, particularly in arts, her drawings no longer filled with dark, swirling vortexes, but with vibrant landscapes, expressive portraits, and always, somewhere in the corner, a depiction of a large, gentle dog. Her teachers marveled at her insightful observations and her profound empathy. Eleanor Beaumont, having channeled her grief and regret into constructive action, became a frequent, beloved visitor at the farm. The initial formality between her and the Evanses had long since melted away, replaced by a deep, familial affection. "Look at her, Sarah," Eleanor would often say, her voice thick with emotion as they watched Grace gallop across the meadow on the gentle mare David had taught her to ride. Cooper loping happily beside them. Who could ever imagine the darkness she endured? Your love, David, Sarah. It didn't just save her, it saved a part of me too. The horror of Grace's ordeal had, paradoxically, birthed something beautiful, with a significant portion of the Beaumont assets that weren't seized or tied up in legal restitution. Eleanor, alongside Evelyn Reed and the Evanses, established Cooper and Grace's house. It wasn't a grand institution, but a warm, welcoming haven nestled on a few acres of rolling countryside not far from the Evans farm, a center dedicated to children who had suffered trauma, neglect, or faced communication challenges. Animal-assisted therapy was a cornerstone of its program, with a new generation of carefully selected therapy dogs. Though Cooper, in his dignified semi-retirement, often made special guest appearances, his calm presence a soothing balm to troubled young souls. At the center's humble opening ceremony, Evelyn Reed spoke, her voice filled with quiet passion. From the profound darkness of one child's unimaginable suffering, we have, together, lit a beacon of hope. Cooper and Grace's house stands as a testament to resilience, to the healing power of love. and to the unwavering belief that every child deserves a sanctuary, a voice, and a chance to reclaim their joy. Grace, standing beside her, signed with a newfound confidence, her eyes shining. I want every kid to have a Cooper, a safe place, and a family who loves them, just like I do. Her simple words, spoken and signed, resonated more powerfully than any eloquent speech. Victor, meanwhile, lived a life of deliberate anonymity. He found work as a groundskeeper at a quiet, out-of-the-way botanical garden, the scent of earth and growing things a stark contrast to the sterile scent of money and power he'd once craved. He kept to himself, his interactions minimal, his days marked by physical labor and quiet contemplation. He read voraciously, books on child psychology, trauma, and, with a particular, painful focus, on hearing impairment and sign language. He would sometimes see news snippets about Cooper and Grace's house. Online, a bittersweet ache in his chest. Once, he anonymously mailed a small, painstakingly saved sum of money to the foundation. The return address simply a nondescript post office box. At least, he thought, a flicker of something other than self-loathing stirring within him. Something good has grown from the wreckage I caused. I will never deserve forgiveness. But Grace deserves every happiness. He even penned a hesitant letter to Eleanor, filled with remorse and a fragile hope for a different future for himself, though he couldn't bring himself to send it for a long time. Years later, the occasion was a county fair where Cooper and Grace's house had a small awareness booth. Grace, now a poised young woman in her early 20s, was volunteering, her bright smile and gentle way with children drawing people in. Cooper, older but still majestic, lay patiently by her side. Across the bustling fairway, a man stood watching, his figure slightly stooped, his face weathered. It was Victor. He hadn't planned this. He rarely ventured into crowded places. He'd come to the fair simply for a distraction, a brief respite from his solitary existence. And then he'd seen her. His breath caught. Grace. She was radiant, so full of life, a wave of emotions. Regret so profound it was a physical ache, a hesitant, unexpressed pride at the remarkable young woman she had become, and an overwhelming sense of his own unworthiness washed over him. Their eyes met. Grace's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, a flicker of an old shadow, instantly replaced by a composed, unreadable expression. Cooper, sensing the shift, raised his head, a low rumble starting deep in his chest, more a sound of recognition and unease than outright aggression. Grace gently placed a hand on his head, and he fell silent, though his gaze remained fixed on Victor. Victor felt an almost unbearable urge to turn and flee, but his feet seemed rooted to the spot. This was it, the moment he had both dreaded and, in some hidden corner of his fractured soul, yearned for. Slowly, hesitantly, he approached the booth. Grace watched him, her expression calm, perhaps a little distant, but devoid of the terror that had once defined their interactions. Grace. Victor's voice was hoarse, rusty from disuse and emotion. You've grown so much. He gestured vaguely. You look wonderful. It was an inadequate, clumsy offering. Grace regarded him for a long moment. Then, a small, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. A smile that acknowledged a shared, painful past but wasn't defined by it. Thank you, Mr. Beaumont, she replied, her voice soft but clear. Her choice of address was a gentle but firm demarcation of the chasms that still lay between them. I am doing very well. There was a pause, filled with unspoken words, years of pain, and the faintest glimmer of something new. From a short distance away, Eleanor, Sarah, and David watched, their hearts in their throats. Sarah instinctively reached for David's hand, She's stronger than any of us ever knew, Sarah whispered. And maybe everyone deserves a chance, not necessarily for forgiveness from others, but to find some measure of peace within themselves. Eleanor nodded slowly, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. Time, she said softly. Perhaps it doesn't heal all wounds, but it teaches us how to carry our scars with grace, and sometimes it allows for new, fragile seeds to sprout in the most unexpected places. Victor didn't stay long. He offered a small, awkward nod, his gaze lingering on Grace for a moment longer, then turned and walked away, disappearing into the anonymous throng of the fair. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He knew he hadn't earned it. But as he walked, a sliver of something akin to peace settled in his heart. He had seen her. She was whole. She was happy. Grace watched him go, then turned back to a small child who was hesitantly trying to pet Cooper. Her smile returned, genuine and warm. The past was a part of her story, a testament to her strength, but it was not her entirety. Her future, bright and full of promise, lay before her, stretching out like the endless expanse of the clear blue sky above the Evanses' farm. Beside her, Cooper sighed contentedly, his old bones creaking slightly as he settled more comfortably at her feet. His love a steadfast, comforting presence, a silent promise that no matter what, she would never be alone again. The seeds of revival, nurtured by love and courage, had taken root and blossomed. What did this story stir in you? Did it make you angry, hopeful, tearful, or all three at once? I'd truly love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and tell me what part hit you the hardest, or what stayed with you the most. Every perspective adds something valuable. And if you found meaning here, consider subscribing so you never miss a story that speaks to the heart. Thank you so much for watching. And here's a small gift from me, waiting for you in tomorrow's story. They said the rain that night was the heaviest in 20 years. Sheets of it hammered down on the rooftop of the Beaumont estate, like fists from heaven, or maybe hell. Somewhere inside that mansion of glass and stone, a child was whispering to a dog. Not just any child, a deaf 7-year-old girl named Grace, whose world had already been far too silent and far too dark. And not just any dog, but Cooper, a Rottweiler with eyes like wet marble and a soul older than the hills. Outside, her father, Victor Beaumont, a man the world knew as a philanthropist, visionary, a rich man with a golden smile, stood under the porch light, staring into the storm. He was calm, too calm, because he knew what was about to happen. He had lit the fire himself, or at least struck the match in his heart days ago, when his daughter found out things she was never meant to know. Secrets, hidden ledgers, names of people who had disappeared. Tonight, those secrets were supposed to burn. Grace didn't know the full truth, not yet, but she knew one thing: she wasn't safe anymore. And when Cooper started barking, deep and low, staring toward the back door like he could smell evil on the wind, she didn't hesitate. She ran, shoeless, soaked, deaf to the storm, but not to fear. What happened next? You wouldn't believe it if I told you. But let me ask you something first. How far would a child go to survive when the person she feared most used to be the one she loved most? And what does a rich man become when everything he's built is on the edge of collapse and the only witness is his own daughter?